I'm Casey Kasem. Now we're up to a hit for a hot new singer who was once so poor she washed her hair in the bathroom at Denny's and was turned away by one clinic after another because she couldn't pay for treatment. Her life reads like something written by Charles Dickens, a tale of poverty and survival. It was back when she was living in San Diego, California. She was living in her beat-up VW bus, which was where she slept and where she kept all her possessions. Money was always scarce, so scarce that if it weren't for a Kmart and a Denny's situated near where she parked her bus, she wouldn't have had any place to use the bathroom or wash her hair. And even then, she had to go in at off hours so people wouldn't see her with a head full of suds. She says the lowest point may have come when she contracted a kidney ailment. The pain was terrible, and so she tried to go to a clinic to get some care. But because she had no insurance and no money, she was turned away by one clinic after another until she found one willing to waive the rules and get her some help. With that sort of struggle in her background, it's no surprise that she speaks of her current success with such wonder. She still can't believe it's really happening to her. And this week, success continues with a song from her 5 million selling CD, Pieces of You. At number 12 this week on Casey's Countdown, this is Jewel, and You Were Meant for Me.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. Well, now we're up to the current hit for a singer who used to live on a homestead with no indoor plumbing. And now she just signed the biggest book deal ever given to a pop musician. You talk about a Cinderella story. This singer and songwriter grew up on a homestead near Homer, Alaska, on the edge of the wilderness. There was no indoor plumbing there, which means Jewel and her family had to go outside to get water for washing up. There was no television either. Eventually, Jewel left Alaska and moved to San Diego, California. The weather was warmer, but she still didn't have running water or television, at least not during the time she spent living in her Volkswagen bus. These days, with one of the biggest selling albums of the past year to her credit, a 7 million seller titled Pieces of You, Jewel has all the indoor plumbing she wants. She also has a newly signed deal with the HarperCollins Publishing Company. They're paying Jewel a $2 million advance for 2 books, a book of her poetry and a scrapbook of pictures and mementos. And that's the biggest advance any pop star has ever been paid. And this week, the star who's about to pen her first book is at number 9 on Casey's Top 40 with Foolish Games. Here's Jewel. That's Jewel with a recent number 1, Foolish Games. This week, the song slides from number 7 to number 9. 5 years ago this week, the number 1 song in the USA was I Will Always Love You by Whitney Houston. Who'll be number 1 this week? We're on our way to the answer as the countdown rolls on.
Casey's Top 40.
Well, now we're up to the current hit for a relatively new singer who sold over 7 million copies of her debut CD, Pieces of You, scored a $2 million book publishing deal, and now she's getting ready to star in a $35 million motion picture. Talk about a real-life Cinderella story. It wasn't that long ago that this singer called a Volkswagen van parked near the beach in San Diego, California, home. She had dreams of someday becoming a singer. But those dreams seemed far away. She didn't even have a real home in which to live. With a lot of hard work, singing constantly at local clubs, she developed a following. And that following led to a record contract and to the album titled Pieces of You, which has so far given her 3 top 40 hits and over 7 million copies in sales. It's also led to a chance to follow in the footsteps of recent female singers like Madonna, Courtney Love, and Whitney Houston, all of whom have found a second success as movie stars. This newcomer is getting ready to make her motion picture debut in a film called To Live On. She'll play the female lead in the $35 million movie, a Civil War epic about 2 young men whose lives are changed forever as the war sweeps through Kansas and Missouri. And it's not a fly-by-night project. It's being directed by the highly acclaimed movie maker Ang Lee, who directed Sense and Sensibility and The Ice Storm. In the meantime, she's at number 13 on our survey with her current hit, Foolish Games. Here's Jewel.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. We're counting down the 40 biggest hits in the 50 state. Well, now we're up to the latest hit for a star who says if it weren't for the internet, she might still be playing in small clubs. The woman named Jewel began to build her internet following when she was playing clubs in San Diego. She says hardly anyone knew who she was. But there was a hardcore group of fans who started talking about her online, telling each other where she'd be playing, printing the lyrics to her songs, and so forth. Eventually, they grew in size, and they came up with a name for themselves, taken from one of Jewel's songs. They call themselves Everyday Angels, or EDAs for short. Jewel says, quote, I began to develop an incredible fan base on the net. Radio stations wouldn't play me. But when they began to encounter my name all over the web, they got interested. Jewel says that these days she has a strong relationship with her everyday angels. She says, I talk to the EDAs on my computer a lot. They show up at my shows with signs with EDA written on them, so I know they're there. Jewel says that when she was recording part of her debut album in Woodstock, New York, she invited some of the everyday angels to drop by and see her. Word spread from one angel to another, and in the end, about 200 showed up. Jewel says, quote, they drove into Woodstock from all over the place, so I put on 2 shows for them. We called it Jewel Stock. This week, the EDA's favorite singer is at number 16 on Casey's Top 40. Here's Jewel with Foolish Games.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm David Perry, sitting in for Casey Kasem. Now we're up to Foolish Games, the current hit by a star who says writing is the most important thing she does. To do it, she needs 3 things: a pen, paper, and a picture of home. Jewel says that as much as she loves singing and as much as she loves playing the guitar, it's writing songs that really defines who she is. She says, quote, I love writing. I'm in love with my pen. I don't understand things until I process them through the pen. It's like a therapist. Like a lot of writers, this star says she needs a fair amount of inspiration to create her words. Part of that inspiration is drawn from things that have happened to her in her life. Part comes from whatever book she happens to be reading at the time. And part, a big part at that, comes from a picture of her home in Alaska that she always keeps near at hand. You see, this woman grew up on a homestead near the town of Homer on the rugged Kenai Peninsula south of Anchorage. For her, home is very much a part of who she's become. By being able to look at that picture of her home, she's reminded of who she really is. Not a rock star, but a woman who grew up in the wilderness, in a house without electricity or running water. This week, a former #1 song Jewel wrote with pen, paper, and a picture of home is at number 26 on Casey's Top 40. Here's Foolish Games.
American Top 40.
These are the top 100 songs in the 50 states. Coming in at number 77 for the year is a singer and songwriter from the state of Alaska who grew up in a log cabin heated by a wood stove. She says it sometimes got so cold she'd wake up and see frost on her brother's eyelids. Well, these days, she's chilling out in sunny San Diego, California. She's Jewel, and her hit is Hands.
If I could tell the world just one thing, it would be that we're all okay.
That's Jewel. Jewel Kilcher with year-end survey song number 77, Hands. I'm Casey Kasem. We're playing the biggest hits in the USA by the biggest stars in the world. When her found fame as a singer and songwriter, she had a big following reading her poetry in San Diego coffee houses. In the wake of her chart success, she's put out a collection of her poetry called A Night Without Armor that's become a bestseller. And she says now that she's conquered the world of music and poetry, her goal is to make it to the top as a playwright. She's writing her first play about the subject she knows best, growing up in Alaska, the child of struggling folk singers. She says it may not play as long as Cats, but Jewel says there's a lot in the play for everyone to relate to. 3 years ago this week, Jewel had one of the top hits in the USA. Here's You Were Meant for Me. From 3 years ago this week, that's one of the top hits in the USA. Jewel and You Were Meant for Me. I'm Casey Kasem. I'm Casey Kasem on a special edition of American Top 40, the biggest hits of the decade. At number 11 is a hit by a singer and songwriter from America's biggest state, the 49th state, Alaska. She grew up on an 800-acre homestead with no indoor plumbing. That's right, there was no TV either, or modern-day distractions. So Jewel spent her time riding horses and writing poetry. And occasionally, she would join her father on stage and entertain local audiences with her yodeling. In 1995, she released her debut album called Pieces of You, which went on to sell 11 million copies. That album transformed the little girl from Homer, Alaska, into an international star. Here's Jewel with her #1 smash, You Were Meant for Me.